7 o'clock. I will call the meeting of the Wasa Policing Task Force to order. We have everyone here, which is wonderful. What are your wishes relative to the July 21st and August 23rd minutes? They were in your packet.
Move approval.
Moved by
I'd second.
Michael, second by Pat. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right, discussion of survey results analysis, Eric and April. And welcome. Eric was going to be here. Right.
Yeah.
Well, April, he said it was going to be up to you to carry the day anyway, so I think we've all seen, or the results of the survey have been shared with the task force. Would you like to give us an overview, and then we can get into the discussion?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if you want me to walk through any of the revisions or if you have any questions about any new analyses. But I think hopefully there was more explanation within the report itself. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I hope there was more explanation in the report itself. Do you want me to walk through the report, or do you just want to talk about it and think about next steps?
What are your wishes?
I think I'd like to walk through some of the revisions.
Okay, we had a request to walk through some of the revisions, so if you can highlight what those revisions were and elaborate, and then we'll get on to the next steps with it.
Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to just talk through page by page what we're seeing?
If you could share your screen, I think it would be helpful to the viewing audience, because this is being shown.
As she's setting that up, John, I think that's a good idea, but I just like to say that really appreciated the way the information was presented graphically, and we could really look at it and see quite easily what was going on with the results. And it became more clear to me why the questions were asked, sequenced in the way they were. So it would make sense when the results rolled in. I think that worked out really well, and I'm really pleased with what I was looking at, and that it was pointed out in these tables where the differences and gaps are that are statistically significant. So kudos to you and your comrades.
I would second that and appreciate the in-depth parts on some of the multivariate stuff. So thank you for taking the time on that.
And Mike, in discussing this with Eric today, several of these pages were there exclusively for your review.
Wow, I feel so loved and welcomed.
Well, we just had them thinking that there may be some people on the task force who were more interested in those data than others. That's all. So let's think about. I think probably don't have too many questions about this sample. Again, I think what I am lacking clarity on at this point that I still think it might be important for the task force to consider in proceeding is how well this sample is representative of the Wasa population broadly. But I don't have reason to believe that the sample is terribly unrepresentative. General perceptions of the Wausau police got high grades overall. This is where we see the first snapshot of a few demographic characteristics that are associated with giving somewhat lower grades. And yes, and here is where I started to provide just a raw score for the mean difference between groups, and then denote with an asterisk anytime something would be statistically significant. But I would encourage us to pay more attention to the magnitude of the difference than anything else. So for example, mean grade given to the Wausau Police Department, remember that grade was on a 0 to 4 scale, so a 5-point scale. So a mean difference of 0.71, we're looking at 0.7 of a point on a 5-point scale. That's a sizable difference. And to put it into perspective, 0.71 on a 5-point scale is, I'm thinking it's not a full point, but a full point would be 20%, kind of going from 80% to 60% on a 0 to 100 scale. So having that size of a difference is important.
April, could I ask that once in a while as you go through that you call out what page of the survey you're on? There's going to be,
Oh, sure.
yeah, we got
Yeah.
different page numbers in our packets online, but we got numbers on the
Okay.
pages on the survey, so just make sure that we keep up with you.
The page of the survey or the page of the document I'm working on?
I think that, well, whatever you're showing us, tell us what page it is. Like the one you just showed us with the
Yeah,
vertical
okay.
bar
So right now
graph
I'm
was
looking at
page
table-
3.
I'm looking at table 2. How about I do that?
Okay.
Focus on table
Just give
numbers
us
and
little
figure numbers?
signals where you're going, so, thank you.
And then, April, before you get into it, did you use the same scoring throughout? The one question that I had is that it appears as if you were using 4 as an A in the beginning, and at the end, the highest value could have been it appears it could have been a 5. So are we
Sure,
consistent with
sure.
the scoring, or if you could, when we deviate from that, if you could explain the
Yeah,
deviation?
I mean, on this one, the mean grade was just put on like a grading scale, like a GPA
Right.
scale. So instead of doing 1 to 5, we did 0 to 4, but it's still 5 points. It's still a 5-point scale.
But just for comparison, because there's times where you're dealing with a
Sure.
0 to 4 and then 1 to 5. So we have a consistency in application.
Sure.
So go ahead.
Okay. So I'm scrolling down to the text above figure 2. Here's where I just laid out the extent to which people disagree or strongly agree versus feel neutral versus agree or strongly agree with a variety of statements about the Wausau Police Department, how comfortable they are going to the Wausau Police Department, how much they trust the department to take their concerns seriously, and so on. There's nothing new here. Majority positive. So these are figures 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And I think what I highlighted in the text pertained to figure 4, which is that there were 15%, in this case, 15% of respondents disagreeing or strongly disagreeing that they trusted the Wausau Police Department to take their concerns seriously. And likewise, a similar response to feeling comfortable approaching the Wausau Police with problems or concerns. And I just highlighted that I don't have an indication of what percent disagreeing or strongly disagreeing is kind of a threshold percent to attend to. So some people might feel that that number shouldn't even be 5%. I wasn't sure. Just kind of looked at that as 2 that were larger. We have a lot of people agreeing that they would respectfully follow police officers' requests. Hope that was helpful.
So April, if I could just interject, if we could, if, in the back of your minds, if you could maybe give thought to what threshold you would want to establish for raising those results for further discussion, and we can talk about those at the end. Is it a 15% disagree or strongly disagree threshold? And just keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll come back and revisit those once April is done with her walkthrough of the results.
Yeah, and some people might think that you should include neutral in there, like if you're neutral or disagree, you know? And other people might want to be like, no, I only want to think about the percent that are disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. So I think, yeah, that is a good conversation for you to have. Yeah, finding figure 6%, of respondents who agreed or disagreed states about reacting negatively to being approached or pulled over. And this one too is quite noticeable. 10% said they agreed or strongly agreed that they would worry about officers being physically aggressive. 13% agreed or strongly agreed that they would feel afraid of the officer. And then after those graphs, I laid out a table to characterize overall differences between different demographic groups in responses to all of those items. So figures 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, figures 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 lay out a number of items. And really, when I looked at those statistically, what I saw was that if a given person felt negatively about one of those items, they felt negatively in response to all of the other items. And so I aggregated each person's response to those items and created an overall positivity score for each respondent. And so in table 3, what we have is the mean positivity score, and we're on this strongly disagree to strongly agree scale, where 1 is low and 1 is high, meaning high, more favorable answers, more positivity toward the police. And I compared groups on this overall variable. Primary ones that are coming through, white versus non-white, we see less positivity in non-white respondents, in non-heterosexual respondents, in those who are 30 and younger, those who have a mental health history, sorry I missed that one, those who are not homeowners, small difference but statistically reliable given the cell sizes here, lots of participants, those with less than a college degree, those who had been pulled over, and those who had been arrested. And those are those same demographic characteristics we talked about last time. These characteristics overlap. I tried to show the overlap of these characteristics that tend to go together in figure 7. Just say as a general schematic, right? So our younger participants, they don't really differ in their gender makeup, but they're less likely to be homeowners. They're less likely to have a college education slightly. They're far more likely to have mental health issues. They're more likely to be non-white. They're more likely to be non-heterosexual. And the overlap in those characteristics is laid out in tables 7 through 10. Do you want to talk specifically about tables 7 through 10? Anybody want to walk through those?
What are your thoughts?
I just had, on table 10, I thought that really kind of got at the crux of a lot of this and showed us the differences in these demographic groups and where we might want to start, focusing with actually the focus groups, kind of show us where we need some work, or at least need to examine why some of these things are happening. And I don't know if a sociologist or something could address how much of the youth, the age thing factored in. I think part of that is just the age of the individual and their likelihood to have been interacting with people who maybe had some experience with the police, and maybe just naturally they're going to be more distrustful, et cetera. But I think Table 10 does kind of give us some important places to look.
Pat, I think you bring up a good point. And I think one of the things that when I look at this, I think about sources of information and media. And so when you're looking at the age difference, one of the things we have to think about is where is their insight, their experiences, where is it being shaped? And so when if you may make an assumption that there's a greater likelihood that someone under the age of 30 is using social media for news, they may have a different perception on what's going on with law enforcement in their community, in the world, in the state, versus someone who, I watch WAOW and I read the Daily Herald or City Pages or what have you. So I think you're right that sociologically some of the variance could be explained, theoretically at least, by some other factors. So, right, so we could at some point when April is really bored, lay over on this, the news source, and see how that, would impact some of this stuff. Is there a correlation between news sources and age? I will say that in the literature currently, in when we teach criminal justice, news sources have a huge impact. So I would think there's a tendency that it might happen here too.
Yeah, I mean, I jumped down to figure 17, and we definitely have our younger group more likely to report using social media often. In fact, it's the one that they report using often, most often, it's the most common one. But you actually can see from figure 17 here that young people report using a lot of sources often relative to older participants. So although we have some indication of, sources, I don't know how much information we can really draw from this.
We can
Mike, is
keep,
there something else that you were thinking that you would want to look at?
I was just wondering if there's a correlation at all, if between age and if there's a statistical significance between age and news source.
Well, it's clear in terms of what they're using often. These are reliable differences. We've got a big sample here.
Yeah, so,
So definitely, yes, right? They're relying, they report, at least, they're reporting. I don't know how people are defining often versus sometimes versus never. That's something to consider also. But young people are reporting that they use social media more, often. They're reporting that more frequently than older people are. But WAO News 9 also, more young people report using that often than older people do. The Facebook page, family and friends, personal experiences. So age is certainly related to their use of news sources, but to me, the most prominent one is, yes, the age difference in use of social media. That's a big one. But the other part of it is just perception that they use various sources often. At least more young people are saying they're using these sources often than young people are.
I think that this chart may be more helpful to us in developing of a communication strategy going forward. I'm not sure how it, it may reflect where we fail to get certain groups to participate in this survey, but I think it would be something that we would want to look at as we go forward and we try to roll out our recommendations and seek input going forward. So I think there's value in keeping figure 17 in the back of our minds and how we approach it. I was sort of surprised by a few of the sources and how they ranked. But I think it gives us an ability to form a better communication strategy going forward.
I was impressed with the ranking of the Wausau Police Department Facebook page. I know personally I look at it, things pop up. But I think it does have a pretty significant following and has become a real valuable tool for the department.
Okay.
Yeah, and it could certainly become a more valuable tool if it's advertised in the Wausau Pilot and Review or, on the WAO News. So,
Any other questions relative to that table? If not, do we want to jump back to?
yes, okay. So, if we jump back to tables 11 and 12, this is looking at, in tables 11 and 12, what I was showing that the demographic characteristics that we looked at before that tend to overlap, being non-white, having mental health concerns, being non-heterosexual, being non-homeowners, that those characteristics are also more likely to show up among those who have been stopped or pulled over in the past 10 months, 12 months. That's table 11. And those characteristics are also more likely to show up among those who have been arrested within the past 12 months. The primary variables that are really carrying some weight here, that's what I explored on the next pages, but you can kind of see them if you look at table 12. Variables that are carrying a lot of weight are just in terms of having negative attitudes toward the police or less positive attitudes toward the Wausau police, being pulled over or stopped. And then when you look within tables 11 and 12, the demographic characteristics beyond being pulled over or stopped or arrested are being, having one or more mental health concerns, being 30 or younger relative to older. Okay. And I think there was one more in there. I'm going to scroll down here. And that is being non-heterosexual compared to heterosexual. So these are perhaps the three key demographic variables that if I were limited in time and resources that I would try to focus on. I would try to look at people who've had interactions with the police, and I'd be looking at trying to do some, I don't know if they would be separate focus groups or some mixture, but to access, right, the detailed views of those who are non-heterosexual, have mental health concerns, are younger as opposed to older. And I think these findings fit. We're seeing a lot of, and I think we talked about this before, less trust in institutions among our younger generation these days, perhaps even more than usual. But yeah, Mike, this box was for you. I thought you'd understand why I did the regression in two different blocks.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Because I was like, well, which way, I don't know which way it would go. So I was just playing a little bit.
So April, to that point, I also really enjoyed that section. I thought it was very informative. You know, as I look at that, one of the questions I had, I think, is in block 3, where it splits off the regression analysis. 11% accounts for arrest and, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read it off the sheet there. Arrest history and then pull over stop history. So I was thinking to myself, well, which one drives more? You know, with the assumption that arrest interaction would drive it more, and that was reaffirmed, I think, or affirmed later in the report, where 66% of people that were arrested reported not being treated with respect, while 28% of people that got pulled over didn't feel like they were respected. And I always just try to put those into context of my own experience. I've been pulled over a couple times in my life for different things, never by the Wausau Police Department, thankfully, at this point. And I reside in Wausau, obviously. But one time, most time it's pretty cordial. You know what you did wrong. You were speeding. You went through a light, whatever. But one time, somebody came up on me pretty hot, and it was just made me feel super uncomfortable. And I think about just trying to have empathy, context for people and situations, and trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And come to find out, the reason I got pulled over is because the dealer that I bought my car for inputted my license plate one number wrong. So they thought my car was hot. They thought I was driving a stolen vehicle. And it was a completely different interaction than I would ever have had on a normal being pulled over or going through a red light or anything like that. So I do think that sometimes we have to think about the context in which the officer's interacting. Obviously, in an arrest situation, somebody has probably committed a crime at that point. There's reasonable cause to bring somebody into custody at that point. So that is an elevated situation as opposed to interaction being pulled over. But just that's more commentary, interesting facts, appreciate the data. And then the last 3 things, and some of the other data as it relates to demographics, I do wonder how much of that is generational to a certain extent. Of course, it's not all generational, but I think every generation, and certainly our generation now, and I think about where we are in our place in history, is we are struggling with the tension of the America that is with the America that it's becoming. And if you look in our data here, you see that even in Wausau. I see the data shows that between those 30 and younger and those that are 31 and older, those that are 30 and younger are 19% less white. Those that are non-heterosexual under 30 are more so by 21%. And I think, we have to think about the context of policing within different generations and understanding and outreaching and understanding these communities, especially underrepresented communities and communities that are becoming more prominent in our country. This year, I think the number of white births was less than 50%. I think that's going to continue, and we need to be able to engage all different facets without, interacting and keeping good relationships with the communities that we've had a long history with. So it's a challenging time, I think, for everybody, whether you're in the workforce or just in the general world, because I don't know if there was any point in human history where there are so many generations living in our world at one given time. And that is inherent in conflict, and change is obviously progressive in nature, and you see that some of our studies here. So I do think that how we reach out to these groups that obviously have a different interaction is important. I do have some general discussion questions that I think I took away from the study that I would like to talk about as a task force about how we kind of take what was inferred or given from the study and maybe focus the groups that we want to touch base on. But just a wide-ranging comments there. But I really do appreciate all the work that you did. I think it's fantastic. I think there's a ton of data in here. You're really good at what you do. You brought great insights. And I think there's a lot for us to take away from this as a community to be proud of, but then also a lot for us to take away from this as a community that we can really be great if we focus on some key areas where there's gaps. And they're pretty clear across the survey.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate your comment about the generational differences, and I think there's a complexity there because we know too that people's attitudes change as they get older, and that young people tend to be more defiant and so either way, we have variables that we think could change with age, but we also have our young people growing up in a different type of situation and context, national context, than did those 10 or 20 years before them. So it makes it extra difficult.
Well, in the Northwestern report that was done for the county 10-plus years ago indicated that the older you get, the less likely you are to interface with law enforcement, too. So there are reasons, you change your habits, your acquaintances, and sometimes your attitude toward life. So there are a number of factors that come in. It may be worthwhile to look at pulling some of that data because it was done for Marathon County and see how that would compare with this.
So can we maybe pivot to just some discussion questions amongst the task force, and April maybe can weigh in on how she's seen in the study? One of the things that I would like to discuss as a group is, within this subset that we clearly see a statistically significant difference in the population of the data set, there's this response that they feel less safe. They feel less safe. And the question is, I think that it's inferring that they feel less safe interacting with law enforcement as opposed to feeling less safe in the community as a whole. And I just wanted to throw that out to the committee to see what your thoughts were in terms of how you see that response and that feedback from the community. Is it truly their relationship and interaction with law enforcement, or are these groups feeling less safe because of law enforcement in the community in general, or in their communities, pretty broadly? Just curious. Comments on that, or April?
Well, I just think that's a great question, and thank you for noting that. I was wondering about that when participants, what was predicting those who felt less safe in their community, and what I saw, right, that, those who are younger are the ones who are more likely to say that they feel less safe, or those with, what do we have here? By the way, it's notable that we have an absence of sex differences in so many situations, but those who are non-heterosexual are more likely to say that they feel less safe, and so on. And so I was thinking, what's their positivity, right, toward the Wausau police? And in fact, these were correlated. So respondents who felt more positive, right, about Wausau police officer behaviors were also more likely to feel that safety in their community had increased. And respondents who felt that officers engaged more often in negative behaviors tend to report that safety in their community had decreased. And this is not to say that one of these variables is causing the other, but that's actually not what I would have necessarily expected, because I wasn't. And this finding made me think, are they thinking about safety in their community as literally safety around police? And I don't know if that's phrasing it the same way as what you were just saying, but that correlation made me hesitate in how to interpret Figure 8.
That might be a good question for the focus groups when we get into it. I just get a little leery of trying to extrapolate a response to that without having specific questions behind it. I understand exactly where you're going with it, but we probably could drill down, but there were a number of questions like the use of force that when I looked at that, what does that mean? And was that the Portland response, or was that the Wasa response? And what drove the answers on those questions. But I don't know that I can give you an answer, but that's a very good question. I think it's one we need to get at. Other thoughts? I think what Michael, if we've all had a chance to review this, I think Michael's taking us down a discussion of what's the relevance of this to the task force moving forward. And again, remembering that this is the second stage of citizen engagement out of actually 4 stages. The first one was the listening sessions, the second one was a survey, the third one is the focus groups, and the fourth one will be the presentation of the recommendations for feedback. So building upon this, what questions does the survey raise that we may not be able to answer directly as a result of the survey, but that we might get a little bit more enlightened with when we get to the focus groups? And I think you hit one of those fundamental questions. What does feeling safe mean to you? Other thoughts? Michael, you said you had a series of questions.
Yeah, the other question I had was around, really, I think for the police department focus groups, and the question I have here is, what does CIT training leave officers short in terms of adequate skills to respond to people with mental health concerns, or are they just the wrong people to respond when it's not imminent danger? I'd love to know, I think from officers' perspective, you can see a vast difference in people's satisfaction with police interactions that had a mental illness, one or more, or multiple. I think back to, doing patient experience surveys in the inpatient hospital when 70% of people were involuntarily committed there. Did you think that people would have a high satisfaction with being there? The answer is, well, no, not inherently, but that doesn't mean that we can't change the way we interact with them while we're there and make it as positive an experience as possible. So that was never a limitation I accepted, I guess, in that environment. But back to the question, what do law enforcement officers feel like CIT leaves them short of? Is their only mental health training? Or are they just really the wrong people to respond? Do they really feel like they're in a situation that they can't really do much about? And what kind of resources do they need to solve the problems and have a better interaction with the person on the street? I think that is a big open-ended question I have for the law enforcement groups, because they're out there every day, interacting, and there's clearly a huge difference in experience. So that was my other major one.
Are you asking for the chief to respond to that, or are you saying that we should chew on that at some point?
I think chew on it. I think Ben probably could contemporaneously respond to that, but I really do think that the officers would have great insight into it, and I do think we should, understand that. I think, the mayor said, and I'm in agreement, and we've talked about it, that we need more CART team members. And I think that definitely is a recommendation that I'm very much in support of. But, outside and beyond that, our officers are often the first person to respond or be aware of a mental health issue. Do they have the resources they need from a training standpoint? Or are they just really the wrong people, and does CART not solve all the problems? What else is that area? I think that's a big question for our officers.
Okay, if the chair would agree that this would be a good time to do this, I would be interested in hearing from the chief as to his reaction to the results, kind of compared to his expectations.
I think, Pat, I'm going to ask that because we need to get through this and identify those questions.
That's
I'm going to
fine.
hold that.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold that for now. Not that it's not important, but I'd like to try to get the questions on the table, and what I'm
Just fine.
starting to do is frame those questions that we might be asking the focus groups, and Michael's given us a couple. Do we have the resources and training with the crisis intervention teams necessary for the officers to do their work in the field? And then we have that issue of safety and the concerns. What does that mean to them? So are there other questions that you think we ought to be asking?
I would just add to the safety one, because we had the other question about whether or not feel their concerns are being taken seriously. And I guess the correlation with the safety, is it that they feel less safe due to the fact that they feel that their concerns wouldn't be taken seriously if something happens for those younger groups.
Other questions?
Mike, can Mike repeat that? I'm sorry, I didn't get to hear the ending there. Can you repeat it, Mike?
Is Will.
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't think it was, I only hear voices.
no, no problem. So I was saying, in correlation, we had the one question about whether or not people feel that their concerns would be taken seriously. And in correlation to the safety issue, I guess the question I was thinking about, is it that people feel less safe, or these younger groups, because they feel that their concerns wouldn't be taken seriously when something happens? So like the younger groups or the LGBTQ plus, is that possibly one of the reasons? That might be one of the questions we want to look more into.
Oh, that's such a great point. And I think, you know, given the overlap in respondents, you know, how they react to the different questions, I'm guessing that link that you're suggesting is there, but it would be really nice to try to get at that in the focus groups. Without asking a leading question per se, right? But be really helpful to ask about that.
One of the questions that I have deals with Table 7, and that is dealing with the differences between the white and the non-white survey respondents. Is there a concern or an opportunity for us to do things differently or better as it relates to the perceived disparities between the perceptions of positivity with the police department, with those reporting one or more stops, pullovers, where you're 13% white, 34% non-white, and reporting one or more arrests, 2% to 19%. Is there a significance there, and are there opportunities for us to do things better? Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I think that we need to highlight both with race, but also with age.
Yes.
And I think that there's, you know, some interest here when you look at page 10, when you start picking apart that, I think there's importance to not only think about all of these in framework, like you were saying, but also to add age into that. Because I think we need to highlight that, yes, they both have influence, but age also has a huge impact right now, and I think that might have a different feel to it that we should make sure we capture.
Other thoughts? Other thoughts on the survey? And again, April, I want to reiterate what Pat and Mike and Michael have said. Will, thank you for your great analysis and putting this together in a thoughtful, meaningful manner for us to deliberate. But
We're going to talk focus groups in just a minute.
Yes.
But with the law enforcement group too, I would be very interested in hearing their perspectives on the data relative to people's response and satisfaction with arrests or being pulled over. And if there were communication tactics we could have with this community about how to make those interactions go positively, because we're not going to eliminate them. But, you know, there's how-to guides on a lot of things. I'm not so sure I've ever seen a how-to guide if you get pulled over, how you should interact with law enforcement. You know, it's obviously an intense situation, but communicating those expectations, I think, is helpful from law enforcement about how we can interact to make that interaction go as positively as possible, even though it's not a good situation.
I think there's and you can get some help from the group in terms of how to phrase this, because one thing I've been thinking about in terms of like when we're looking at different media, I almost wonder with the young people if they feel sort of overwhelmed, like if there's an overconsumption because they're consuming more resources than sort of the older population. And so I guess when I'm thinking about the question, I'm thinking, I don't know, is the majority of what you see out there focused in terms of police, is the majority of what you see from all the places that you consume information negative? So I guess I'm thinking more of an overall kind of question in terms of all that they consume, because I think it was kind of hard to say, like, they follow one particular source, although social media is one that's a difference. But I think the clear difference was that they follow many more sources than sort of the older generation. So I guess that would be, I don't know how to quite phrase that, but if someone kind of knows where I'm going. I also want to say thank you too, and just, I see Eric is on there. I want to say happy birthday to him. It's his birthday. Thank you.
Oh, happy birthday, Eric.
Wow, that's really special. Thank you.
There's no better way than spending it with us either, is there? We thank
Will,
you.
was that Will?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for saying that so much more eloquently than I. Like, they're following more sources. Like, okay, thank you. I love where these questions could be going. That's awesome.
Other thoughts, other questions? Is there any value in us looking at figure 10 when it looks at the issue of adjusting their behavior appropriately for mental health issues, where those with one or more mental health concerns, 45.5% said sometimes or never or rarely do the officers adjust the behavior. Is it worth us trying to dig a little bit deeper into what that might mean and look like in the focus groups?
Can I just say that I think I think this is a really interesting question, and I think it would be helpful to understand what people feel officers need to do that they're not doing. Like, I think it's easy to say they did this and they did this. You know, kind of like researchers, it's really easy for us to rip up other people's papers, but we don't necessarily have a good idea of how they could actually have done it better sometimes. And I wonder if a useful question would be get them to specify, well, what exactly could they have done in that situation, whatever it may have been. You see where I'm going?
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts anywhere in the report? Before we move on to the focus groups, Ben, here's your opportunity to respond to Pat's question. So if you want to come on up.
To flesh it out a little bit, like, you looked at the survey when it was first presented to us, and you looked at that, and you must have had some expectation, well, that's going to come out this way, and that's going to come out this way, and young people are going to be more negative, and I guess I was quite surprised of all the things in there, the different in either perception or reaction for people who have had some mental health concerns. So I just thought I'd ask, were you surprised with any of this?
I think if I'm being honest, I didn't know exactly what to expect in terms of the survey results. I will say when I read through them and got and was here for the presentation of the results. I was pleasantly surprised at the results of the survey. I think it was overwhelmingly positive towards the police department. 85% of respondents rated our overall performance as excellent or good. I think that's an extraordinary number, one that I wouldn't have anticipated would have been that high. 82% said that they agree or strongly agree we're doing a good job of keeping the community safe, that we do a good job of solving problems. And so from that perspective, I think I was pleasantly surprised that the survey was speaking well about our department. So I think in terms of my thoughts overall, I was happy to see the results. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not work for us to do. And in terms of these focus groups, I think, I think the task force here has talked about some really good questions and follow-up questions for very specific groups in those focus groups. So I'll just give a couple of my thoughts on those things. I think you talked about this a little bit, but in terms of people who we've stopped, issued citations to, or arrested, I'd be interested to know what are their expectations around that interaction? What is it specifically that they felt, that we weren't respectful in that interaction? How can we improve, I guess, is basically the question there for those individuals. Because I think to some of the points that were made, it is a more intense, I guess for lack of a better word right now, interaction if we're arresting somebody or we're issuing a citation. So I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be respectful. We absolutely should, but it's not as cordial as a couple of friends or even acquaintances meeting on the street, right? That's a different type of interaction. So I would want to know from them, what is their expectation and what specifically was it that they experienced that made them feel disrespected or didn't respond positively. Among the respondents who felt less safe in the community, I would want to know what makes you feel less safe. What is it specifically? Is it something in the community that is making you feel less safe, or maybe a different question, maybe in the same question, what is it that the police department should or could do to impact your feeling of safety? Because I think when I was in college, part of the community policing program was discussing the police role is to help community members feel safe. It's to improve safety for sure, but it's also to help people feel safe, and that's an important thing that our community members should be able to talk about. So I'd want to know, what is it that makes you feel less safe, and how can we help with that? I thought Michael's question was really good when he talked about asking police officers when responding to people with mental health issues, what additional training do we need to help you in those situations? I would also be interested in asking people who have mental health concerns or mental health diagnoses, what is it that they would want to see from law enforcement that they are not currently seeing from law enforcement? And I think that part of that is in CIT training. We have people who have mental health diagnoses talk about their experiences with law enforcement, which I think is very enlightening to police officers taking the CIT training. But maybe that's a question that we could ask them as well. What is it that you would like to see from law enforcement? Because those are very complex situations, very individually specific based, their experience is going to be different depending on their diagnosis, depending upon their past experience with law enforcement and other authority figures, and so on and so on. So from them specifically, it'd be interesting to know what we can do better. I guess those are some of my thoughts. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I agree with, well, not a matter of my agreeing with it, but appreciate your response. And I do think that, you and your department and Matt last week or last meeting indicated that was not happening. But I think what you could have done is looked at that and said, hey, we got 85% good grades, but we'll wrap this up and let's go home. But admirably, I think you and we should continue to look at the areas where we're got some apparent slippage or different perceptions or whatever, and work on that. So I think we can be very pleased with the results, but still work.
Deming would be proud of you.
Who would be proud of me?
Deming, continuous quality improvement.
There you have it. I'm glad.
Michael got that.
Striving for excellence, that's what we do here.
All right, with that, other thoughts on the survey? Then let's shift into the issue of focus groups. And I think we've started that discussion last meeting, and we wanted to sort of see where we were with the interpretation of the results. Thoughts on focus groups, Michael?
I'll go right out of the gate and then you can amend it, but I'll make the motion to proceed with April's recommendation for last meeting. I thought it was brilliant. It's stated in the minutes, so, you know, she had a perspective on what we should do in terms of focus groups. At the conclusion of the last meeting, we did discuss more time to add to that, so I'll make a motion to start with that and then allow others to add any other additional focus groups or areas they would want to see. But I still stick with my assessment that that was brilliant, April.
Okay, is there a second? And let me just, it was for under 30 of various races, mental health concerns among police officers arrested in or 2 or more stops. Those were the groups that were outlined last meeting per the minutes. Is there a
I
second?
thought I would second it, but I thought there were more groups. I thought we had like 6 or 7.
Well, that's what April recommended per the minutes.
Well, we could say that however many focus groups there are, that they include those groups.
Yeah.
But I think it was up to the task force in terms of how many focus groups they wanted to do.
We had at one time talked about 2 within law enforcement, one with management and one with the field, just to make sure that we gave an opportunity for people to speak without chain of command involved. And so if we honor that request and we're consistent with that, there would be 2. I think that when I started looking at the results, there were, I think we continue to have some cultural differences that I think would be represented by the interest of probably the H2N concept among Hispanic groups and others just relative to cultural differences. But I think that's captured here. Are there thoughts that we would go, you know, you've got those people that have encountered law enforcement, we've got the mental health component. Are there other groups? Do we want to make sure that when we look at this, we've got those demographic areas that April had lined or outlined as outliers, which gets into making sure we've got a cross-section of homeowners versus non-homeowners? Do we want to make sure that we've got sexual orientation represented in those work groups? You know, again, that age. Others, are you looking for other groups beyond that?
Well, I guess let me just throw this out as a group. Do we think that we need to split up in any way that under 30 group, like you were saying, in terms of any other within that?
I think I'm just hearing this and processing through. When we're talking about focus groups, I think I'm concerned about the presentation and the recruitment for these. Because when we look at this and we're finding, you know, you want under 30 and people who have had interaction with law enforcement, at some point we have to make we have to figure out how we're going to make these folks feel welcome and want to come. To put a posting out to say, if you've been arrested more than 2 times, please come talk with us because we want to learn more about your experiences. Right? I mean, it's, you know, or you're under 30. Great, congratulations. We need more under 30. It's like when you go to church and you're the new person there and they say, which committee do you want to be on? And here's your pledge card. Okay, we have to be creative in our recruitment of this. And so you're not going to get, I mean, my prediction is we're not going to have people pounding at the door if they're under 30 to do a focus group. And so I think we need to be very outside the box, whether it's virtual meetings or you know, Facebook groups or something, to look at a different qualitative approach on this. Because I just worry that we're going to invest a lot into designing a focus group for a population that really doesn't want to come to a focus group thing. I mean, it's like, here's your coffee and some crumpets and sit around and talk to us. That might not be your best match. So I don't know if we want to separate it more on the invite and the group design. We might want to try to pull that out when they're there. But this is a big, I mean, every dissertation student who wants to look at 30 and under, they would sit in this table and say, good luck, let me know. Because I would love to have that answer. So we're up against a challenge.
And the question is, how do we recruit, or do we rely on an application process? I would think we probably need to do some recruitment within targeted groups, and I'm not sure how to best go about doing that, but if we're going to look for that diversity, you're going to need to sort of target certain populations through the recruitment process. And whether that is going to H2N and asking them for 3-4 names, and going to the Hmong Mutual Association, or going to other community organizations and asking them for some potential candidates. We could be working with the folks in the DA's office and in others, and relative to some of the offenders or the probation, parole, and Zastro, I'm trying to think of her first name, from the Sheriff's Department, and others, but we could probably recruit those individuals to fill those areas if we're interested in that perspective.
I'm wondering if we should pick out the topics first, and we've got 5 listed, under 30, various raises, people with mental health concerns, Hmong citizens, police officers, and those arrested with 2 or more stops. If we did that, I think it's not going to be one size fits all in terms of trying to get those people into a room. So maybe toss it back to whips and their expertise in gathering groups like this. Maybe they have somebody on their staff who's 25 years old and knows how to round up the under 30 group. So maybe we pick the topics that we want to hit first, and then with whips' help, figure out how we're going to actually get the people in the room.
Do we have a budget for incentive of attendance? Under 30 and all of a sudden come and get a $25 Quick Trip gift card, you're going to get a different population, and people might be more willing to show up. Ethically, we could have that debate, but in this case, we're looking for people to show up and get some insight. And if, we're saying, look, we'll throw out some pizza, come, and then if you make it and you hang out and participate, there's a gift card for Quick Trip. And because at some point, the generation you're looking at is not the civic generation of do good for the bigger society. We may have to get to the bribe point.
Incentive.
Okay, incentive. Right, but it's still the same. I mean, but how are we going? We're going to need something, a carrot at some level to help them want to take the time to come.
I guess for me, in thinking about those topics, I feel like that's down the line to our next topic. I think what you're talking about more is marketing to these groups versus choosing which groups we decide to go after. So, I mean, at least from my perspective, and I think we know we have to focus on under 30. So I think that's a definite topic. I think the other question is that group need to broken down anymore? If not, I think we have to do that group. Now, how we market, we can talk to whips, we can figure out other things, but I think that's another topic, or I guess that's my perspective.
I like the thought of relying on whips to develop a marketing approach. And Mike, I think you were listening to Eric in my conversation this afternoon where Eric suggested the $25 gift certificate as an incentive to encourage that participation. I think you're right with certain populations. It's critical if we're going to get that. If we value the input, it's probably a small price to pay to ensure that we've got that perspective coming forth. So Eric and April, would you be comfortable if we challenged you, if we gave you the topics, the areas, and trying to develop an approach to in making sure that we engage people in those categories?
I can answer that, and then April can chime in if you'd like. We're absolutely prepared to do that, and like John said, we mentioned, we firmly believe in the tactic of using incentives. It's kind of now almost, I don't want to say expected, but in research it's extremely common, and we're prepared to really run with it as soon as you tell us which groups you want to make sure we meet with.
Pat?
We got 5 groups. I guess there's one group, we've got 5 groups proposed, and a motion that's been made and seconded, but I guess I would like to comment that going in, however many months ago we started this, if somebody said who are the focus groups going to be, they're going to be one for black people. And we don't necessarily have that if you're kind of a disaffected 40-year-old black person, you're not being reached by any of these focus groups. So I guess I would suggest that we have one just for black people or people with, whatever, of any age, and talk to them. So that would be the number 6.
And I would agree with that. And I would ask, I guess, April, out of the state, do you feel that there are groups that it was just so statistically insignificant that we do need more of those responses from any particular group that maybe you just felt like you just didn't have enough information and we do need to focus on?
I think that, Eric, you had mentioned that we did not have enough information from Hmong participants, from Hmong residents. So that's a group that's definitely missing. I think the other groups, we face the possibility that, if we can pull in some young people, we're likely to get young people who also have mental health concerns, who may also be of an alternate gender or sexual orientation, and who may have been more likely to have, interactions with the police. And that could be good or bad because it doesn't really help us isolate the factors, but at the same time, like we've seen, they run together. So by doing some focus groups with, maybe one group is focused on getting young people, or 2 getting young people if we're splitting them, by virtue of doing that, we will get more participants who are likely to also have a mental health concern, and so on. If that makes sense, I do like that idea of also having just we don't have black residents here, and that's a key stakeholder group.
May I just mention one thing, and I think this is hopefully self-evident, but sometimes it bears repeating, and I say that for my own benefit as well, that remember that focus groups are not an extension of the survey in the sense that it's not scientific, and so we can't imagine, or should not imagine, using focus groups as a way to say, oh, because we had underrepresentation in the Hmong community, let's get Hmong people to participate. I mean, there's a certain logic to that, but at the same time, just keep in mind, the purpose of focus groups is really to drill down on some of these questions that we have lingering. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't do a Hmong focus group or an African American focus group. I just mean that, let's know why we're doing it, that we're doing it because maybe there's some unanswered questions or there's some depth of response that we didn't get in the survey. I was thinking about young people. The example there is exactly your conversation earlier, which was about, I'd really like to know from some of these younger people, and I would split it into two groups, sort of the 21 and up, or name your age, 22 and up, and then under that. But, maybe we want to ask them, tell us about, these results of the survey. Like, how do you interpret this? Like, why do you think young people have a more negative perception, of the local police? And how does this relate to your feelings of safety? And really kind of just asking a few people to elaborate on that so we can get a better sense of what we think people mean. But let's not just, make the mistake of thinking that this is an extension of the scientific survey.
Any thoughts? So Pat offered a friendly amendment to expand that to the black, is it the BIPOC group, Black Indigenous People of Color? Or is it just blacks? Is that acceptable as you want to offer it formally as an amendment because we do have so. So is there a second to the amendment?
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? If not, all's in favor of adopting the amendment to add BIPOC group will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Now, the original motion was April's recommendation with the addition of the BIPOC group. Any discussion? And the intent there is to direct WIPs to develop a strategy for creating and populating those focus groups.
Sorry, one more. I kind of, listening to Eric, really thinking about then in that idea of, because 30 and under covers quite a bit in terms of young people. Should there be that split in terms of age? Should there be a 18 to 25 and a 25 to 30? Or do we think?
Or could we leave that up to them to make that determination as to how they will populate it, and if it leads to two groups, so be it?
I was going to say would be entirely comfortable with leaving that to whips. No.
If you're comfortable with that,
I think that's good. I think it's a good point, and they can make that call.
are you comfortable
Is
with
that
that,
right?
Will?
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned it. I just wanted to make sure. I like it. Yeah, comfortable with that.
The only question I would have is like kind of mechanical. If we get into this, we've got 6 groups now, and we're a month into it or whatever, and we think, oh, rats, we missed one. What would it screw us up if we added another one that we discovered that we had missed? Or do we want to say, this is it, this is the 6, we're sticking with it? That'd be probably for Eric.
I'm sorry, what did you say? I think this question is more for you folks. I mean, we can adjust anything that we do along the way. And so we're happy, and I'm just talking from a WIT's perspective, to stick with the 6. But let's say, you guys talk more, or we together, are looking at the preliminary results of 1 or 2 focus groups, and you say, hey, you know what, we really missed something here. Let's do this. We'll be happy to do it, but I'm not going to be looking to do beyond whatever the 6 are that you tell us, unless you direct us in that direction.
Let me just remind the committee, we've got deadlines facing us. And so we need to begin to wrap this process up.
Yeah, we should try to stick with the 6.
Yeah.
We can.
And,
That's good, thank you.
all right, any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion as amended will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Then April also shared with us, and April and Eric, the narrative, the 46 pages of comments that we received from the survey results. And I may skew the discussion, but I'm just going to offer an observation. It appears as if there's not necessarily correlation between the score and the comments. There were people that were ranking them as being very, very satisfied that said comment was dissatisfied. And while I see there's some value in some of the comments, I don't know that it's, at this time, I kind of view it as a rabbit hole, for lack of a better term, that we could go down without necessarily enlightening the process at the end of the day. And I offer it, and maybe we can collect some themes out of there. I think there were some good themes, and I think that I pulled out cultural differences with a few of the comments that were attributed to Asians. I think I pulled out. I did raise some questions based upon the comments about whether or not there were more mental health issues among some of the people making the arguments than they responded to in the surveys. I think that there were a good number of comments relative to dispatching that I think we ought to raise and share with the Sheriff's Department and the communication staff there relative to perception of being welcomed when they called in and the difference between the emergency and non-emergency number. But I think there are some themes, but I don't know if you share those observations or what your thoughts are, but I guess my thoughts are perhaps that it would be an interesting endeavor, but I'm not sure that we would get a lot out of it at this time. April, I'll throw it out to you for comments.
Like you mentioned, if you want me to go through systematically and look for themes or have several of us do independent theme analysis, we can do that. I get the feeling that we've really picked up on some trends from the quantitative analysis that we want to probe further with the focus groups. So, just because you have open-ended comments doesn't mean that you have to, go into the nitty-gritty of them. I think sometimes it can just be useful to review them and look at the variety of comments and recognize that some people are really dissatisfied because they were speeding, darn it. They didn't want to get caught, versus, some people are dissatisfied because they feel like the officer, called them a putz or whatever. So it really is up to you what you want to do with it, but I don't think that you should feel pressure to do something more with it just because we collected those open-ended responses. Sometimes we ask for open-ended responses so people who feel the need to comment get a chance to comment. And so people don't always use the open-ended comments.
I just want to add, I think that the comments, in my experience in research and stuff, these are great, right? Because comments are depth. Comments are the social story. Comments are the lived experience. So if anything, it might foundationally for thematic development then when we're doing focus groups to say, wow, the people who are under the age of 30, we saw this theme. How can we work that theme into a focus group conversation or things? But there's a unique person that fills out a survey and then adds comments. Mm-hmm. I mean, so every survey you fill out, how many times when it says, do you have anything else you want to add? You just like, no, I got the survey done, I'm done. I hit submit, delete the email, right? So it's a distinct part of the population. We can learn from them things. I think the very least it might be helpful when we're doing thematic stuff for the focus groups. They might provide some foundation work.
Yeah.
How big a ton of work would be involved? I looked at that page after page of stuff and just saw page after page of stuff. I mean, how much work would it be to ask you to develop, like, David was saying, some kind of general themes or thoughts. It would fall on April, I believe.
Well, yes, it would be, to do it right would be a lot of hours because it would involve more than me. You can't have just one person deciding what the themes are. And I can imagine trying to sort the file by, under 30 to see what are the comments for them, and then sorting again for one or more mental health concerns, and are we seeing things there? So it would take some time for me to consider what is the process I would want to follow, and then bringing people on board to do that process alongside me, but independently, and then meeting together to compare what we're seeing. I would want to do it well, and yes, it would be relatively taxing, to be brutally honest.
So there's a spectrum in this too, right? I mean, I don't know if WIPS has qualitative software, Eric, and to throw stuff through there, which is, a computer tries to find the themes. And any qualitative researcher will say, yeah, sort of. But it at least pulls things. And so you can find keywords that are mentioned over and over again and things like that, up to what April's saying. And in there, you have someone that's going through all the transcripts, and it takes I would agree with her. I think highlighting for when we look at certain demographic groups, if we're doing a focus group with them, maybe going through that subset of data. I especially am interested in the 30 and under, and to go through just those comments, right? Because that eliminates a significant percentage of the data that we have in front of us qualitative wise, and then pull out themes there. But to go through all of this, as a member of the committee, I don't see reason to invest the resources in WIPS or our budget to do that at this time.
And
Eric, I really appreciate that comment. Thank you, Mike, and I agree with you. I agree with April. I do think that, let's say we take that example of the under 30, if we can sort of isolate those, just look them over. That also could inform the types of questions that we ask. And then when we get responses from those focus groups, we can also see if some of those responses are paralleled or mimicked or mirrored in some way. And that gives a little more confidence that there's maybe some kind of a trend. But I agree. I don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze, as they say, to do some kind of massive qualitative analysis. I personally tend to use these kind of quotes when you're flushing out a report, so that you're giving some quantitative data, or you're talking about what you heard from X group, Y group, Z group. And here's a comment that illustrates. I mean, they're illustrative, right? They're not meant to somehow be, in my opinion, to be analyzed for trends.
Will?
And keep all of our sanity.
I think generally I echo the comments. I think in reading these comments, it just seemed to just reflect what we already see in the other study in terms of cultural and age differences. Really, so, I mean, all the situations were different depending on their own individual interaction, but it just seemed in terms of when you look at demographics, the same sort of differences. So I don't know if we get anything more from this that we don't already have generally from the study in terms of those same cultural and age differences.
So I'm sensing a consensus, if I could throw this out, is that taking what Mike had thrown out in context of trying to look at it for themes within the groups and see if we can develop then some questions for those focus groups, that would be a worthwhile endeavor versus a detailed breakdown on a quantitative basis of all of the comments. Is that the consensus of the task force? All right, let's move with that. And I think you've got your instructions, so we'll be talking to the two of you, and thank you so much for the effort and the analysis and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah,
And-
thanks to April. Hey, John, one quick thing, maybe this is something that's already been assumed, but if you, as you are going through the report that April put together, or just thinking about reflecting on the conversation tonight, if there are certain questions that have come to your mind that you think, I really think we need to ask these in the focus groups, I hope you'll feel comfortable just emailing April, myself, or everyone, if you'd like, what those potential questions might be, because I think you're in a great position. We might have done the study, but, you're the one who has to come up with the recommendations. So, if there are some things that you really want to know, please do forward those on. We'll also work on it on some as well, but I think that would be a great help to us. So thank
right.
you.
Yeah, I want to second that, especially, I think we have Mike, but there's also Michael, right? Yes, and Michael, I was trying to get down some of the questions that you were laying out, but they were eloquently said by you, and I was paraphrasing. So if you email those to us and everybody else as well, that'd be fabulous. Thank you all. It's really, it's pretty cool hearing your reactions to these data and where everybody's mind goes and reacts. So thanks for letting me participate.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. We're going to skip the legislation update. I wanted to get into a discussion of defining needs for additional services. In your packet for today was the Wasa Policing Task Force draft recommendations. Those are a summary of the items that Matt Barnes had provided the committee last week, and the mayor, Ben, Matt, and I spent some time just trying to refine those a little bit. We had hoped to have a meeting with representatives from North Central Healthcare before today's meeting. That meeting will actually take place on Thursday morning to talk about these and other issues, but I thought we might throw that out there to make sure that we captured those thoughts, to see if you had anything else that you would like to do. We want to begin those discussions with North Central on those areas of mental health, trauma, crisis services, and make sure we've got them so that we can begin that discussion of trying to frame what those recommendations might look like and what the cost might be and who the partners might be as we move forward. So I'm going to just quickly run through those. And if you have questions on them, please let me know. But the lack of a local detox facility, and I didn't do a spell check, but part of the remodel at North Central, lack of an open medical monitored treatment inpatient facility, that's part of the remodel. And we'll talk to them about timeframes. The prompt medical necessity determinations under 5515 of the Wisconsin statutes. And we sort of have, not a facility issues, but rather trying to work on best management practices, and that involves judges as well as other facilities. Case management for those entering voluntary commitment. Try to meet the least restrictive threshold, but expand case management opportunities in the community. Housing alternatives for those in need of services with low incomes, poor rental history. Request that parties and partners develop community programs. 24/7 supervisions for those in need of support, expand case management opportunities in the community. CART expansion, expand crisis intervention capacity in the system at PD or in the community. And the community in all cases is North Central Healthcare and other providers. And then we have the transportation and necessary services for those at risk, and expand on-demand services to meet critical needs. Those were some of those issues, and we refined them a little bit. Are there other things that you would like to have us explore in the context of trying to get our arms around what those might look like? Are there some things that we're missing in this. This is Matt's list. Ben, is there anything you want to add to the discussion? But again, we're going to start those discussions with the mayor, the chief, and Matt on Thursday, and we'll continue that, bring that back to this group. But I think it's critical if we're going to develop recommendations, if we know some idea of what they might look like and what the cost might be and what the expectation for the city, potentially the county and North Central and other partners might be. Any thoughts? Did we capture it? Kelly, anything that you think we're not getting at in here? Others? Will?
I have a quick question. As we were looking at this, I was just thinking about something. When we were just going over those focus groups, one of the groups was mental health concerns. Were we also counting that with behavioral, like for instance, addiction in that group? Okay. Sure.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Did we capture this? Michael, any thoughts? Mike, Sarah? Pat? All right, we will take this list and begin those discussions. And again, some of these will have a lengthy process, and some of them will have a significant price tag. But I think that these are things that, or items or services that have been identified as being impediments to transitioning people in the community, addressing mental health needs, crisis moments, and others that I think we've all come to understand are critical issues facing the police when they go out and respond in the community. So we will use this as the basis. Mike?
The only other thing I'm thinking of is if you're going to be talking with staff from North Central Healthcare this week, is to go into that conversation with the understanding that they are not the system, they are part of the system, in that they get stuck. And the big question always is the situations where you're stuck in between two absolute answers, and it's then what? Where do they struggle to? With
That's
then
why
what?
you have two county board
Yeah.
supervisors on this task force that may be able to bridge that gap.
Yep, and that's true of everybody operating in the system. It's the situations of somebody needs help, but they don't fit in a perfect category. Then what do we do? What do we really need for those people? And I think the people that work in the system know best.
Well, and quite honestly, the justification for the county's involvement is the failure of the current system results in additional jail time in the use of those correctional facilities as a treatment option in many cases. And the more successful we are, the more likely we are to have a positive impact on net jail days. So there's a role for the county and a benefit to the county for participating in these types of discussions. And you're right. North Central Healthcare, the Community Services Board can't make the decisions absent the funding from Lincoln, Langlade, and Marathon County. So with that, we will move on with that. We'll save the legislation to next time. I'd like to try to get out a couple of meetings so we've got them on our calendars, if that's okay with you. We really don't have a regular meeting day anymore, although this one seems to work. Does the second, well, I'm looking, how would Monday the 4th look?
I've got Park and Rec on that day, but it starts at 4:30, so if we started this at 6:30 or 7, that'd be fine.
Would that,
They're on the calendar till 6:30.
so do we want to go at 6:30 or 7?
We're going to be meeting at Riverside Park. I think we'll wrap it up. I think 6:30, if that's preferable to the group, we can do it. And if you start without me, that's perfectly okay.
So can we look at October 4th, and then can we look at 3 weeks out from there would be the 25th? Does that work for members? I'm getting nods. 6:30? All right, let's pencil, if we can send out an invite to hold the date, so it's on people's calendars, and we'll plan for those two. At the next meeting, we'll report back on how those discussions went. We'll be talking about the focus groups, we'll talk about the legislation, we'll get back into the discussion of the blueprint for change and the presidential commission's thresholds, and I think we need to begin to move toward refining our recommendations so that we can get those done. My goal is to be done soon. I'm not sure what that means, but I think to be meaningful in the 2022 budget, we're probably late already, but we need to begin to make some of those recommendations soon. So anything else anybody would like to bring before us? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order. Moved by Mike, seconded by Pat. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you all.